it's Mike from brew-juice.com. I'm all by myself this week. I wanted to try and show you guys an experiment that's been in my mind for a while, and I figured this would be a good week to give it a try. It's a really simple experiment. It doesn't directly pertain to brewing and making beer. It's a process experiment. One thing that's always sort of bugged me is that I've never been able to get a good trub cone in the bottom of a kettle when there's a dip tube or something in the kettle. So what I wanted to do is, I've got a few different kettles I can use. I'm going to put some water and some grain in a kettle. I'm going to whirlpool it around, and we're going to see how well we can, make a little pile of grain in the middle to simulate like a trub cone, like hops and hot break and stuff like that. We're going to use that as a way to see if, when there's a fitting inside your kettle or a fitting with a dip tube inside your kettle, does that affect and create too much turbulence when the wort or the water is going around and prevent you from making a good tight cone. So that's something that's always bugged me because I've never been able to do it. I don't do whirlpooling anymore for the sake of drawing off the side to get clear wort. I use a false bottom, I use a plate chiller, sometimes I use a hop stopper, a fine mesh screen. But this is always something that I've always wanted to come back to and check out. So this week's video, I'm going to show you several shots down inside a couple kettles. We're going to whirlpool the water around with some grain. And we're going to see what it looks like and see what happens. Alright, let's get started. Okay, here's kettle number one. The first experiment is going to be in this totally smooth side kettle. It's got a slightly concave bottom because it is a keg, but it probably would have the same dynamics as a flat bottom kettle. I do not have a flat bottom kettle that has fittings in the side of it, so I will use this in one of my other keggles as a way of looking at how the different hardware stuck on the side of the kettle affects trub slash cone formation. Okay, so time to fill this with some water and put some grain in there. Okay, here we go. This is a Trub Whirlpool experiment number one. Smooth walled kettle with no fittings inside, no port, nothing. This is just an empty keg. I've got 5 gallons of water in here and about 2 ounces of Black Prince malt. I figured Black Prince would be good so we can see what's going on. Here we go. I'm going to get this going, whirlpool it up. Alright, we're going to let that go, let it settle, and see what it looks like in a minute. Alright, it's only been a few minutes, maybe 2 minutes since I whirlpooled. You can still see it's rolling around in a circle a bit. But as you can see, aside from the stuff floating on the top, the vast majority has settled into the center as we'd predict. So the next test is to do this with a kettle that has just a 1/2 inch fitting stuck in the side. Alright, in this keggle, it's the same setup as before, except now there's the 1/2 inch coupler sticking into the side. So we're going to fill this up with water, put the grain in, whirlpool again, and we'll see if the added turbulence of a coupler sticking on the side disrupts the ability to whirlpool and create a trub cone with my grain in the middle of the kettle. Okay, here we go. The second whirlpool experiment. I've got the same amount of water in here, about 5 gallons, a little over 5 gallons, and I've got my 2 ounces of black malt in there. So let's give this baby a whirl, and we'll see how we do this time. Alright, it's been about 2 minutes. As you can see, I'm a little bit surprised that the trub, if you will, has settled to the center yet again, despite there being the added hurdle, the turbulence being created by that fitting. Most of the wort, the grain, has settled into the center again. It's difficult to see on camera, but there is a little bit of an irregular shape near the fitting, that little C shape towards the bottom. You can probably just barely see it. So that's interesting. Next step is to mix up the grain. I'm going to put a dip tube on there to the center, and we'll see how that disrupts the flow. Okay, scenario number 3. You can see now I've installed my dip tube. It goes right to the center of the kettle. So again, we're going to come in with the whip, and we're going to get this thing spinning and see what happens. So interesting, it looks the same as it did before. So that's really interesting. I would have thought that that dip tube would have made it more difficult to cone up in the center. So I've got one more thing I want to try, and we'll see if we can come to some conclusions about the effect of kettle fittings and dip tubes on your ability to whirlpool trub into the center. Alright, I know what you're saying. Why would someone have a dip tube going to the center of the kettle and then whirlpool to the center of the kettle? Well, you're right, no one would do that. So I dug around in one of my old toolboxes and found this older dip tube where I used to draw from the edge. So you can see this comes off of the fitting, makes a 90-degree turn out to the edge, and goes to the bottom as well on the outer edge about 2 inches from the side. So I'm going to get this guy going. I'm going to stir up that grain a little bit. I'm going to get this guy going with the whip, and we'll see if this bigger 90-degree turn more in the flow, if this affects the ability to create a trub cone. Alright, it's only been a couple minutes. You can see the whirlpool is slowing down, but you can see in my tea-colored water from that black malt that most of that grain has settled to the center despite having a dip tube in there creating extra turbulence. So I'm really surprised by this. Alright, let's I'll reset up the camera and I'll give some final thoughts. Okay. There you have it. We did several examples of an empty kettle, a smooth kettle, and a kettle with a fitting, and a kettle with 2 different dip tubes. Every single time when I whirlpooled, using my wine whip to stir it all around really fast, we got a really good coning of the grain material that was in there, which, to be quite honest, is a little bit surprising. When I've done this before, when I was brewing with just a kettle and trying to siphon from the side of my kettle and get clear wort that way, I could never get a good cone to form. So I'm really surprised, and I always assumed it was because there was that dip tube in the way when I was drawing off the side of the kettle. So why is that happening? Well, I wonder if the grain, it really isn't a good substitute for light, fluffy hop pellets and hot break material. The other thing too is I'm just using 2 ounces of grain. Most of the time when I brew, you're talking 2 ounces of hops at least, and then a whole bunch of hop break. I remember most of my entire bottom of my kettle would be covered in that stuff. So maybe 2 ounces of grain just isn't a good indicator. But if we want to talk about fluid dynamics, and I don't know anything about fluid dynamics, it doesn't appear at least that a dip tube in the way of the whirlpool affects your ability to create a cone via whirlpooling. So maybe I'll have to save some break material from a brewing experiment, a brew session, and drop that into a kettle, plus and minus the dip tube, and see if that makes a difference. But well, if that question's ever bugged you, at least now there's a video on YouTube from Brew Dudes showing you that, hey, I guess it doesn't matter if there's a dip tube in the way. As long as you whirlpool vigorously and give it enough time, I guess it'll all come together and settle out in the middle. And you can draw a clear wort right off the side. So I hope this video was helpful. It is really hot down here in the basement. It's about 98 degrees today outside here in New England. So I'm going to finish this tasty brown ale and get editing this video. So thanks for watching. Please like, comment, subscribe to our channel. Drop us a line, say hi. We thoroughly enjoy interacting with our viewers. So brew on. Cheers.